Hello, I'm Brabazon and welcome to this, my first vodcast in a vodcast series exploring each of my books. And of course we're starting with my first book, which is Tracking the Jack, a retracing of the Antipodes. Tracking the Jack was published in the year 2000 by the University of New South Wales Press in Sydney, Australia. It is my first book and it's not my PhD. Here is my PhD. My PhD was completed in 1994 and it was conferred in 1995 at Murdoch University. I data mined 9 refereed articles out of this PhD, and that was important for me to do at that time. I needed to work. I couldn't wait around for a postdoc to appear. I needed to earn a living, so I needed to get those refereed articles out quickly so I would then get a series of academic posts, which I was successful in doing. So I would say to early career researchers watching this film, perhaps don't be too wedded to your PhD. A PhD is different from a book. They're different genres, they're different oeuvres. So your PhD may be suited to a book, but if it is complex, it's difficult, it's starting to waste time, that you could be moving on to new projects and ideas, then you need to be doing that. So recognise that the PhD in the first book most likely will be on quite different topics and ideas. This book also came from teaching. Before the age of 30, I'd worked in 4 different universities because, again, I had to earn a living. I moved through a series of contract posts, not only in Western Australia, but through Central Queensland University and also the Victoria University of Wellington in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Amazing experience, wonderful city, wonderful country. But I was a teaching academic at that time. I was a great teacher, I love teaching. At the end of my life, I probably will be known as a teacher more than all of these books, I think, and I'm very comfortable with that. But I do believe in the importance of writing, I love it, and I love disseminating ideas. I think that's what we as academics should be doing. But I had a very, very high teaching load, and so any research I did had to be squeezed around multiple lectures, tutorials, PhD supervision, early in the morning, late at night, and on weekends. And I realised all of a sudden that the mode or the form of writing that was best suiting me was the essay. So I started writing Tracking the Jack as a series of essays. 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 words that I could basically write in a week or a week and a half. And so I could commit the time that would start it, plan it, research it and finish it. And about 4 chapters in, 4 essays in, I realised, wow, I'm developing an argument here. So I didn't start out Tracking the Jack to write a book. I started the project thinking about the nature of colonisation. Because you see, this thesis is a thesis of history. I'm an historian by training. My first degree was a first-class honours history degree from the University of Western Australia. My first research master's degree was in history from the University of Western Australia. So I am an historian, and I came to cultural studies much later. So this book captures that interest in British history, that expertise in British history, but also widens itself out to my experience through Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand via my teaching. I was moving through the disciplines at this point. I was interested in history, obviously, so the richness of contextualisation, but I was also interested in textualisation that was coming from cultural studies. So in the essays in this book, I was bringing together contextualisation and textualisation, history and cultural studies in quite an interesting way. And the essays in this book show that. So they're on, for example, Sam Neill, thinking through multiple ways of doing masculinity. There's another chapter on Michael Palin, again thinking about his travels around the world and how Englishness does travel in terms of the colonial pathways and the post-colonial pathways that survive to this day. There are other chapters on the Dr. Martin Boot and how Englishness moves through fashion, and also sport. My first chapter on Perth Glory exists here. So a little tiny English Association football team in Perth, Western Australia, and how they deployed English modes of fandom and English modes of doing football. So again, all of this exists here. But the book really was about exploring a fundamental problem. And that problem was, why did Australia and Aotearoa New Zealand continue to look to England rather than to each other? I was fascinated on what being Antipodean would look like. What did it mean for Australia and New Zealand to look to each other rather than continually look to the former colonial master? And as someone who had lived and worked in Aotearoa New Zealand, I was very aware that Australian studies and Australian history was taught to New Zealand students. I was also aware in Australia how rare it was that we would be teaching New Zealand studies, that actually there was very little understanding of the complexity and the intricacy of New Zealand in Australia. When I was teaching at Murdoch University, a subject called Cultural Difference and Diversity, I would always make sure that there was a week on Australian multiculturalism, and that it was followed by a week on Aotearoa New Zealand biculturalism. And the students' first assignment asked them to think with a lot of care and compassion and intricacy about the relationship and differences and dissonances between those two ways of doing difference. So Trucking the Jack looked at the unstable, the unpredictable ways of doing colonisation, and how colonisation exists in our present, in our everyday popular culture. I am a theorist, and I'm very comfortable and very proud to be a theorist. You'll never ever hear me say, oh look, I just do theory, or I'm very comfortable doing theory. But how I do it is, it's not a matter of popular culture being an example of the theory. So in Zizek's terms, for example, Kung Fu Panda being an example of his theory. I don't do that. What I'm interested in is how the popular culture can lead the theory. So if you're thinking about Sam Neill, how can Sam Neill as popular culture provide us information about theories of masculinity? So often the popular culture for me leads the theory. The final bit of this podcast I wanted to talk about, particularly for early career researchers, is how to get the book published. The hardest work you will ever do is publishing your first book. And I was a nobody when this book came out. I was a lecturer in a minor university, in a minor city, in a minor country. I was nobody. And yet I had written a book. I sent the completed manuscript to the University of New South Wales Press. They didn't know who I was, completely unsolicited manuscript. But I was lucky. I was good, it was beautifully written, it's a great book, but millions of great books are written that are never published. Plenty of great books are sitting in drawers in people's homes. I was lucky because an amazing editor by the name of Nicola Young read that book, saw something and published it. You know, first authors, first book, we're very dangerous. No one knows who we are. Who would buy it? But she believed in me, and she believed in this project, and she believed in this book. And I really need to thank her more than I can ever convey in a video, because my career would have been incredibly different if this first book hadn't been published. The final comment I would make to you too, for the guys and gals out there who are perhaps in casualised university work or with a heavy teaching load thinking, I can't write. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Perhaps start with essays. Start with a big idea and just paragraph at a time, write that idea out into an essay. Then write another, then write another. I didn't realise I had a book here till about 4 essays in. So please believe in yourself. Keep putting one foot in front of the other, and all of a sudden a book will appear. You'll have to be good, you'll have to be committed, you'll have to be focused, and you will have to be lucky. You'll have to find an editor who believes in you and your words. But if you do, then one of the great experiences of your life may emerge, and that is the first published book. You'll remember it for the rest of your life, and it will transform the way you think about yourself and your ideas, because once you have a book, they move through space, they move through time, and you're going to meet people that you never would have met in a classroom or at a conference. Thank you for listening to this first vodcast, and we'll be moving to the second vodcast on ladies who lunge.